So welcome everyone. I'm Jane Henley from the Construction Sector Accord, and today I'm excited to have a chat with Amy Marks, who I just spent a couple of days with this week, and it's been refreshing and inspiring to hang out with someone who has such a depth of knowledge in this space of, how would I describe it? The future and the present, everything to do with digital, offsite manufacturing, modern methods of construction, software innovation, all thrown into the mix.
Little rugby in there.
Little rugby, few high heels. I was actually listening to one of Amy's talks when I was just really trying to understand what her perspective was, and she used the analogy of playing chess, and that really resonated with me because I feel like there's lots of moving parts. So today I'm going to ask Amy to introduce herself in a second. We're going to kind of cover three main areas: change and this kind of chessboard in front of us and what it looks like and where we're going and what are the dynamics, like the digital landscape, like what really is BIM and how does that fit into the mix. We can go deep or we don't need to go deep depending on how many questions come through there. And then we're going to unpack some of the kind of elephants in the room around demand and scale and company size and what factories are producing in modern kind of factory environments or offsite manufacturing. And the reason why we're covering a lot of territory, because Amy's history is as a CEO of a modular company and now working for a very large, and she'll explain her position there, digital platform. So, it's like we can cover all of that territory in one conversation. So I'm going to hand over to you, Amy, to introduce yourself, and then we'll jump into it.
Awesome. I thought when you were saying somebody who knows about a lot of different things, you meant yourself. Actually, I was just as in awe of you, Jane, over the last couple of days. So let me just start with that. So my name is Amy Marks. I'm the Vice President of Enterprise Transformation Practice at Autodesk. I came to Autodesk about 3 years ago from our built environment ecosystem in many different roles, from, owning conventional construction companies to, steel and concrete, modular company, including some, multi-trade assemblies for very complex buildings, and then consulted for quite a bit of time around the world in places like Singapore and here, in this side of the world, on Australia and even New Zealand, and all throughout the world, of how to optimize the use of modern methods or, industrialized construction in people's very large scale and even small projects. So, and a super New Zealand rugby fan, for those of you. Thanks to Becca, they sent me this jersey from the World Cup, and I've got about a suitcase of stuff that I'm going to be exchanging with some customers as well when I come here. So that's me in a nutshell, I think, maybe, cool. Jane.
Yeah, thanks. And I think the great thing about having you here and bringing your sort of international perspective is that you've actually been coming here for 10 years.
Yes.
And so we don't have to update you on the context and all of the challenges, because you've heard all those stories before.
Right.
And so you can actually go quite deep into the New Zealand context, which is super helpful for us.
Yeah.
I also just wanted to thank, the reason why Amy's here is the NZIOB and the BIM conference that we've been to the last couple of days, and BIM NZ. And at the end of this, I'll talk about the actual work program that we have to drive some of this work forward with NZIOB. But right now we're going to jump into the exciting topics of change with Amy. Did you want to share your first slide? I mean, I've kind of handpicked out a couple of areas that really resonated with me of Amy's content, and this first one around change and the relationship between resistance and dissatisfaction. So yesterday in the room, 250 people, I asked people to put their hand up. Actually, I'll tell the story after, Amy. You explain this first.
Yeah, happy to. So this is actually Dan Miller's formula for change that I love so much. I think it is formulaic. If in order to have change, you first have to start with dissatisfaction, right? So you either have to be like very unhappy with their current state, or you have to be aspirational to want to get to some different state. I always say, what does your company want to be when it grows up? And if you're not there yet, you have some sort of dissatisfaction. After that, you have to have a vision for what's possible. And I think, around the world, people are really great at painting the picture of some vision. I think where most people fall down and change is that they then need to take that vision and have first concrete steps of action that they can do incrementally in order to get to transformational change. But all of that has to be greater than resistance. And resistance is mostly internal at people's organizations, and then slightly less external resistance. And there's a lot of things having to do with resistance, like reducing friction and the way change management and things like that. But in order to really have change, I have found that this formula is important.
Sorry, I was just trying to unmute myself. So yeah, I'm really keen to unpack this level of dissatisfaction, because if you think about that equation there, that has to be high first before the vision and the first steps are even going to have any relevance in this mathematical equation, right? So yesterday I asked the audience, like, who believes that the level of dissatisfaction is high enough to do something about it? And who believes that the resistance is stronger? And so we had a show of hands, and the dissatisfaction, we're ready for change, won by, I would guess, around 60 to 40. So it feels like and sure, that was a room full of people that pay to go to a conference, which is a bit progressive. So I don't know, maybe we're at 50-50. So it feels like the level of dissatisfaction is quite high, but the resistance to change is equal.
Right.
So let's unpack that. I mean, what is causing that level of dissatisfaction? What is causing this kind of wastage and lack of productivity in the system? And let's just unpack this a little bit.
Sure. I mean, look, we're a $14 trillion ecosystem in the built environment that is disconnected and has yet to be connected through really real-time e-commerce, if you think about it. So I don't think there are any of those ecosystems left on the planet, but for ours. I think when you think about dissatisfaction, you also then have to take it to the next level down, which is, you could be unhappy the way that things are now, but are you making money off of that unhappiness in your organization? Like, are you making money off of that very wasteful thing that most people are very dissatisfied about? And if you're unwilling to actually recognize that you will only probably be able to make money on that very wasteful practice for not that much longer, that's the next question you have to ask yourself. Like, you could say, like, look, it's a shame that we draw things that are never going to be built. They get redrawn several times. We go to bid for things to procurement for tender that are never going to be purchased by the majority of the companies that are spending all that money to tender them. And you're basically saying, like, what happens to all of that waste in the system? And if you're getting paid to draw things that will never be built, or you're getting paid to redraw things that were not drawn correctly the first time, that's a problem. And I think, as big, I call them serial owners, like big governments, big data center owners, big manufacturing, people that own like 30 data centers or 20 hospitals or, 40 assisted living facilities. How much longer are they going to be willing to spend their limited effort and resources on very wasteful practices? And so that I see around the world is going away. And if you're not figuring out how to let go of that wasteful money and like create some value that will be there in the future state, you could be just kind of living off everybody else's unhappiness, even though everyone is unhappy, if that makes sense.
But how does that change actually come about? Because, I mean, we have this status quo, right? The resistance and the dissatisfaction are kind of at a lockerhead, right? So there's that amount of waste. We know there's those problems in the rework, and we know that there's people, charging time for things that they are quite happy to charge time for. But like, is it the new innovative companies that come in and replace? Is it this kind of international pressure that comes into New Zealand that, makes the incumbents kind of go, oh, right, okay, this is something now, where have you sort of seen that tipping point of getting people to act?
Right.
Take it seriously and not just jump into kind of protectionism or whatever the alternative is.
Right. You know, so there was a book called The Innovator's Dilemma by Clayton Christensen. I don't know if anytime you say the word disrupt anywhere around the world, they're quoting him actually. And he talked about how you could disrupt an industry, how you could chip away at the bottom up from and displace incumbents. And that's how industries change. And so we've all read, you know, that book over the years, and people think that the ecosystem around the built environment can change the same way. And that's just not true. You can't actually change it the way that he discussed an industry, because it takes about 12 different industries to build a building, right? To design and build and engineer a building. And because we have that different dynamic than just like, let's say he used the example of the mini mills to the steel mills or Uber to taxis, right? Like we have to think about it differently. And so it's sort of like the innovator's deception. That's actually like, I've written a paper and coming hopefully a book with that, which is, you can't chip away at the bottom. Look at all these teeny little tiny innovative companies, even in places that have much more scale like the United States. Like modular housing, even in the US, is like, I don't know the exact number today, but it's definitely less than 1%. So, I mean, what needs to happen is really top-down change when you have to affect an ecosystem. And that's by one of the reasons I came to Autodesk. You need the biggest technology companies, the largest owners, the most influential governments that are seeing change elsewhere and aren't going to stand for the disconnected, you know, wasteful, more expensive, longer processes than they could get in some other country. I think the part that's interesting, not that everyone doesn't play their part from small companies to big companies, but look, we're in a world right now that has been accelerating change for the last, you know, few years with COVID. And you have to recognize that New Zealand has a very good opportunity right now, like you did in the banking changes in the banking industry, where you could pilot some very innovative things in a country that has very innovative people who care about this planet. And so I ask my friends in this space, like, why couldn't you do what you did for the banking industry and ecosystem worldwide by doing new and innovative practices like you could do here in the built environment? So there's both opportunity, because there's, you know, listen, international pressures around supply chain and labor force and all of that, which is just getting worse and worse, right? But at some point, you have to be you have to actually take control of what can be changed and lead, or, you know, change will happen to you. And I think nobody wants to have change happen out of their control to them, right? So I think, like, as an example, maybe a great one, some of our biggest, you know, customers that are here in the space are telling us when international companies come, or companies that even have international experience, they're seeing areas of the buildings actually like blacked out, where they're no longer going to design and engineer them anymore. They're getting process of the construction is now like products of equipment. What used to be a process build is now a product that somebody's making elsewhere, and they'll either ship it in from another country, or they will, like, you know, they'll have only certain suppliers building it, and you're not able to design or make money off those spaces anymore. And it's like, imagine what happens when you're building a hospital and all of a sudden all those really complicated areas are now blacked out, and either you're the designer, and what's left for you? What's left for you as a general contractor if everything becomes equipment that's somewhat being assembled? And I think you have to start asking yourself things like that, because that is happening even here in New Zealand.
Well, what's your take then on where we're at? Because yesterday we heard some really great examples from Kiwi Rail, from Waka Kotahi talked a little bit, a small company, Makers in Wellington, I hadn't even heard of before. Warren and Marnie talked about use of LCA. We saw the digital twin of Wellington City Council. Like, there's some things happening, like you said, the leaders, right? So I don't know, what's your takeaway from what you've seen over the last couple of days of where we're at?
So I'll just throw this slide up. Actually, this is something that I wrote maybe a few years ago called the transformation framework. In order for you to change, you know, we talked about what's necessary, but like, okay, now you want to change. First, you need foundational skills and tools and a culture for change. You want technology and processes that actually work. And I think I see a lot of that, right? Like, I think there's a lot of great culture here. There's a lot of things around technology and embracing technology, because again, you want to do more with less when you have limited resources. And I think, you know, but after that, you have to start thinking about all those blacked out spaces. Somebody not only physically productized something, but they also created a digital workflow and the industry workflow with stakeholders in order to get that physical product with the data that's associated with either that, plant room or that head wall or that skid or, that wall panel. So I think people are starting to productize things. I mean, listen, I've known those guys from Maker for 10 years. I think I saw them when they were kids. Like they were still kids, I felt like, when I saw them today or yesterday. They looked like less of kids, but they still look like kids to me 10 years later. But, you are seeing people productize things and you're seeing them understanding the digital workflows that are necessary. And I see a shift in that mindset. I think where we're, again, you're sort of between that foundational and productization phases here. But ultimately, you can't digitize things that are, or you don't want to digitize things that are actually not processed well, right? So if you think about anyone in manufacturing, first you lay out factory things and you adjust them before you automate things. That's like the last 5% of what you do is digitizing and automating things. You first just need to really map out the process of things. And that way you can then digitize them and understand how to connect them through things like the cloud and really, stakeholder platform thinking so that people have access. Then you optimize things. Like I think the thing is where we get very frustrated is people jump right to like these cool stories of optimization. And, they'll show you how something could be built with a 6-axis arm robot in a factory. But like, yeah, and some people can afford that, but they shouldn't buy it because like they don't have all the other 4 things before optimization. Like they don't have a culture of understanding how to use a 6-axis arm robot or what scale they can feed that. Or, I always make a joke. It ends up like my treadmill in my bedroom, which has like now a coat hanger on it. And it either like gets very dusty in your manufacturing facility, or it just makes a lot of scrap faster. Right. So you got to really do those first 4 steps. But I think ultimately what's great about New Zealand is people do believe in circularity. I think they just need to extend the definition outside of the environment only. And we have to recognize that all this digital waste that we talked about exponentially leads to physical waste on our planet. So, if you're designing assumption-based design spaces that somebody has to make something that's a one-off every day, like we can't go into every hospital project and pretend we've never built the hospital before, and like that they have to be all different. So I think we're sort of in the between 1 and 2 over here. The good news is I do feel like in New Zealand, many of the architects embrace the fact that there are lots of places and engineers in the building that they don't want to spend their time on, and that they get paid 90% of their fee detailing things like documentation for things like fire stairs or doors and hardware, and 10% for their artistic genius. And they would recognize now that they want to get paid 90% for their artistic genius because it's easier to assemble the things that are productized already, and they can spend more time on the more beautiful aspects. And also the end user's experience of things like, when you're in those spaces. So I think New Zealand has a very special culture that allows people to understand that. So, but I think maturity wise, we're probably, somewhere between, I say we, because I'm a Kiwi now, I think between 1 and 2. What do you think, Jane? Where do you think we are?
No, I agree. And I really like this slide because it gives us a frame of reference to know where we're at on the journey, right? Because this is a journey. Every country's at a different stage. So I really appreciate that. And so this area of kind of productizing, you said something interesting yesterday around like the elephant in the room for New Zealand around scale, right? We have this kind of dilemma of how much do you invest, how much automation and digitization, how much do you invest for the production of a smaller number of houses. Right. And so you mentioned about like people being quite focused on one product out of their factory, and this idea of maybe diversification, because I mean makers talked about how they do artwork and they do residential and they do schools, and they already have that productization mindset in a small scale factory. So can you just unpack this diversification equation, because this scale issue is like number one, the issue that comes up all the time.
Yeah, I'm a little surprised. I mean, we're still talking about scale 10 years later. And I'm like, you're one of the greatest countries in the world that has, things like the black ferns and the All Blacks, and like you're beasts in the world in many different ways, like just amazing, incredible country. And we keep like putting on ourselves the fact that we don't have scale. And I'm like, it's almost like saying like, if you equate it to a different industry, it would be like if Boeing said, well, we can only produce airplanes if we have like enough spaces to build the airplanes in place, the stick building airplanes inside of hangars. That's how we're going to produce more airplanes. And that's really what I hear about housing here. They're like, well, I need X amount of bays and, to do volumetric modules only. And I need X amount of scale for X amount of years. And I'm thinking to myself, like, I don't know any business in any world, in any country that could say, like, if you gave me 3 to 5 years of product, I could invest and build something that just makes you this one thing. And, like Kayanga Ora even can't give you that kind of scale and promises over so many years just for like one maker to invest into some of his factory or her factory. So I think you have to think about this like just the way Boeing, as an example, buys component parts all around the world and they assemble those in places for planes. I mean, we've been saying that analogy for so many years. If you think about New Zealand and the surrounding areas, you don't necessarily need to produce the volumetric home. There are people doing, services, commercial work that could be making those, pipe spools and, the areas for the HVAC systems. And you can be assembling those things from many of the commercial services subcontractors that have fab shops and decoupling that home across many different businesses. By the way, those guys would love to do more component piece part work because the big commercial jobs make their business sort of like go in lumpy, clumpy waves. The more smaller products they could fill in for different types of buildings actually smooths out their business and allows them to invest more in their manufacturing capabilities. So I think we're sort of like, we're looking to cure cancer and we're like, well, you're a dentist, you should be able to cure cancer. We're like, wait a minute, that's not the right, you're looking in the wrong spot. It's like, I see like, we sort of like think it looks like squint your eyes could solve the problem, but it's just not true. So I think it takes a lot of many different types of manufacturers and builders and building product manufacturers that can assemble any type of building. So you need to spread it around a little bit. And I think the better you do that, even the more you'll be able to export into certain places component parts for some of these larger owners that want to take you places with them, whether that's in Asia. Listen, in New York City, we had buildings from Poland shipped in for high rises already, and in on the West Coast from China, all over the world. We know in Australia they ship buildings from lots of places. I mean, you don't have to love that, but it's just factual that like we're in a global economy right now that you can both benefit from or have tremendous pressure from, but you have the opportunity to spread it around here. Like you can get a market and get enough of it by looking across 6 different building types more so than you can one. Think about it like that.
So that takes us then to like that concept and that assembly type model. What needs to underpin that? So there's obviously a kind of digital framework that needs to be in place for that to even be a reality, which we currently don't have. We do have in the world, but it's currently not very well used in New Zealand. Can you unpack that a bit? And just as I'm seeing, thanks, Adrian. There's one question coming through. I have a bunch of questions that people put on when they registered. So start putting your questions in the chat. I'm going to fire away some of the ones I've got shortly. We're kind of almost half an hour in and we're setting the context. So as questions come up, write them. Okay, tell us how to what underpins this like new world that you're talking about. How do we get there? What technology is needed? Okay, I'll let you go, but I also want you to just explain, like people always talk about BIM as being the thing. Like, can you just make sure you put that in your
I'm going right there. I'm going right to BIM right now. So, I mean, listen, we all understand that 2-dimensional drawings will give you so much information. And then obviously, I always say building information modeling, going to 3-dimensional drawings and beyond is like, you have to be this tall to ride the ride, right? Like you at least have to get to that place in order to see the next steps of this future state. That is foundational, right? The issue has become that it's not enough. So like I in the audience, I know, yesterday I said, how many of you have ever had a BIM model that you can't build from? And a builder raised their hand. He said, every time I get a BIM model, he's like, I can't build from any of the BIM models I'm getting. And I think that is, a premise. We have to understand that building information modeling or models, the I is really an important part, right? So the information that's informing that BIM model is what seems to be the next step in our progression that is sometimes lacking. And so that's like when you talked about chess earlier, when I first came to work for Autodesk, I made the comment that like, you can have all the right pieces to play chess. Like, we have Autodesk Platform Services, which used to be called Forge. It's like a chessboard, basically a developer's platform. And you can have really great products like Revit or Autodesk Construction Cloud or Fusion and manufacturing, even our media and entertainment, AR, VR type stuff. But if you have them rearranged and it looks like the board is set up to play Mahjong, you can't play chess. Like that's like if you're starting with an assumption-based design of what I always say is like a dumb box as an example, or just the geometric space, and you think that's enough, and that somehow we're going to fill that information on, which we have to way downstream. Like we have to flip that on its head. You got to rearrange the chess pieces in order to play chess. And so when we talk about things like manufacturing informed design, so that the maker information or sustainability informed design, where the carbon, embodied carbon, let's say I'm talking about, this electrical skid, that electrical skid, which is, my makeup, you can't see, but this is my electrical skid. And with it, I need to not just know how it's made, the rules and constraints. I also need to know its adjacency, like what can I do with this skid and what can go next to it? And that needs to be, unfortunately, detailed out in things usually that aren't necessarily the same tools you use for designing concepts, right? You need to use things that are like Inventor and Fusion and even SolidWorks, not our product, that are mechanical CAD tools that will actually allow for you to consume the maker data, right? That lives with this little, almost like a little data packet backpack lives on this skid, right? Like I call it my Dora the Explorer magical little backpack, where like anything I need to know about that skid, whether it's its embodied carbon, whether it's its make information of what what machine tooling it can be made from, what its rules and constraints of what it can go next to, its inputs and outputs. It has to live with that physical component, and we need to be able to consume it into our BIM models. So if you think of, like, we have a program called Manufacturing Informed Design in our incubation that you can do beta with. There's a slew of manufacturing informed design products that are out there coming up in the world right now, not just ours, because people are recognizing that, we started saying design for manufacturing and assembly in our ecosystem, but we borrowed it for manufacturing, where the word design meant the people that make ease of manufacturing, ease of design, that phrase, have the make information. Our architects in the world heard design and they thought, oh, that's my job. I'm the one supposed to it's DFMA is on me. And I'm like, no, it's actually on the makers to define those component kits of parts with all the information that you should still be able to consume, arrange, and then customize and disseminate, as long as, you've not broken the rules. And hopefully the technology doesn't allow you to. But then connecting it to things like, out in place with project management software, with, issue management and RFIs and things like, that have already built in that connected place, like the Autodesk Construction Cloud as an example, or other products that are out there. But I think, that connectedness has to start with real information, right? Like, I don't care what platform you use. And listen, I always say this is the Autodesk platform. If you look at my iPhone as an example, Waze, Google Maps, and Apple Maps all interacts with the Apple platform, just like Spotify and Apple Music. Fusion, Forma, and Flow, which is our cloud information models on the Autodesk platform, enables competitive software and wants to enable even beyond that more and more. And our partner software, we have I think 4,500 apps right now, and I think almost 200 a month are being built at one time. So this is your moment in the sun to see some digital glue or connective tissue that's missing, and take some of your domain expertise and create, the next Waze on the Autodesk platform, or the next Spotify, or things like that. So, but I do think it starts with understanding the component part that you're trying to design for, and what data needs to be associated with that, from concept all the way through digital twin and then back around to inform it.
So there was a discussion yesterday about market versus mandate around some of these kind of rules or agreements, or specifications that you're talking about that define the backpack, right? And the interoperability of the pieces within each backpack. It seemed like your opinion was that the market, actually quite a few people's opinion, that the market need to decide this, and it should come from the manufacturing end of the supply chain and inform the design. Whereas in the UK, we look at the designers have set the rules, and that's mandated, and it going over the supply chain. So there's different ways to get there. Let's unpack what you think on that.
I always think a bunch of architects shouldn't get in a room and tell people how things should be manufactured, just for the record. That is not what I believe is the best way to do things, especially in the same token. And I'm not picking on the UK, but especially when they're not creating an opportunity for people to invest in factories, when you're just like everybody else and you'll get a shot to bid at something, but no one's going to invest and become manufacturers just because they might win a piece of work at some point on something that they're not set up to exactly make. So I don't like to think about I like to look, Harvard case studies are a great way to learn. I like to look at history of other things and other platforms that have been very successful. You can look at something like an Amazon or an Alibaba. You can make anything in the world. And as long as you meet the data schema requirements of like posting that up on Amazon and you meet all the rules of it, you can see manufacturers, resellers, and distributors all on Amazon selling same different things. I can still search because I had a data schema as a patron of that site. I can search, for all those things, and it comes up in criteria that they had to meet in order to sell on that platform. But they didn't tell them how to make my shoes. You know what I mean? Like the shoes are whatever the shoes are the manufacturer makes. I like to buy shoes, or my rugby kit is whatever they decided to make. But Amazon didn't tell them how to make that. They just said, if you want to sell what you are selling in these categories, in these places that meet these, of course, legal standards in some cases. But other than that, the maker is actually defined, and the market defines who actually has the most reviews and stars and how many people are actually like buying those things and using them over and over again. So I'm a capitalist by nature. I think, the government guys even laughed and kind of shook their heads. Like, you should tell us why we're doing things and what it is we're going to do, but how, I don't believe is that. I think the how should be left to the market, because that's the only way things survive. Like, right? Nobody wants. You can tell people, it's like children, no offense, like not that we're children, but I could tell my kid a million things I want to have done. What she ends up doing is her free will and what she's going to do. I can only make suggestions. Do you know what I mean? And I think we've seen that with other platforms, and I think you've seen some fail and some succeed. And the more open they can be and let the market decide, the more successful they are around this world.
Okay, well, that's going to be important to kind of take on as we start to unpack the work of the Accord and what are the agreements we need in place as an industry to move in this direction, right? So we have a working group set up, and I'll mention that at the end. I guess if I think about the Amazon example, that's kind of, a very market-driven approach. I know that some examples when the internet edge was, Akamai out of Boston, they pulled a bunch of companies together and got agreements that were not government driven as well.
Yeah.
So
even in media, Jane, even in media right now, there's, universal scene description, which is like coding that a lot of the media companies, we work with Weta down here, obviously, and some other groups in media, because we make movies with some of our software. But there are some really amazing things happening with like industry consortiums that have nothing to do with the government, that people are coming together and saying like a data standard should look like X so that all of us can use it and be more productive across the globe. Right. So I think business can do a lot of things with the more, like sort of a lot of places like Singapore government gave incentives, right? So they incentivize people to do things. They didn't mandate things or as much. They didn't mandate things as much. Like I always think the carrot works better than the stick in some ways. And I think, people just react better to that, and the markets do too.
Yeah, well, I'm excited about this unfolding work that we're going to facilitate and see where we end up. So it'd be great to have you kind of plugging in from New York and see how we go over the next year. I'm going to just take a couple of questions. I've got one here from Kim Aitken. You mentioned that the fractured market base makes a bottom-up approach quite difficult. The most effective pathway is top-down. While we as the innovators work out our concrete first steps to the market, what are the other steps and our engineers and architects and contractors and partners can take if we're waiting? So that as we're waiting for this top-down utopia to occur, what are the concrete steps we can take to get businesses happening and moving? I guess it's that maturity of the market, right? So yeah, there's quite a few small businesses actually are trying to get off the ground in this space, and they could see themselves as a little early. Right. So what have you got to say for those guys?
I mean, listen, I'll say to the architect, let's start with the architects and engineers for a minute. Mark Evans, are you an architect? I see a couple of people there. Ian Chamberlain, are you guys architects? You look like an architect, Mark, are you? No? Builder? What are you? Builder. All right. It's hard to see when you can't see people's hands. But like mine are, builder hands. Who's an architect out there? Ian, you're a builder, right? I can tell that. No, architect, what a builder for sure. Mark, anyone out there, architects? I'm going to talk to you guys for a minute. I love all my builder guys that are here. I'm a contractor's kid, by the way, and I grew up as a contractor. I always say I'm still dirty from the job sites. But I think you have to think about what it is you're doing today as an architect or engineer that is actually being drawn, that is never actually manufactured or never actually built. That is wasteful. And you get paid on those hours. And so most people are unwilling to give up those hours to draw things that probably they've drawn in some format before. And that they're just, we have to flip it on its head, right? So it's like, I have guys that have big architecture engineering firms that have literally said these words to me. My friend Jim Tavernelli from KLH, he said, I had to take a real hard look at myself and what I wanted to be when we grew up as a business. And did I want to just keep drawing things that were wasteful and never going to be built? If I didn't, and I knew that that would be imposed on me one day, I had to burn my business to the ground. He said, I had to be willing to burn my business to the ground and start only working with the contractors and the building product manufacturers that are actually creating the drawings that are now consumed by my owners directly as building products. I had to get my data in order. I had to understand the easiest process to do that. And he's at the top of his game, right now, those kinds of guys, because they decided that a common data environment where they could share information inside their own organization was more important than paper. They had to decide that they were going to reach through downstream to the makers and move them up to the front of the process as partners. Because if not, if they realize that at some point they might be obsolete, right? And so I think changing the way the contracts and the billing structures and what you want to get paid on is a big thing for engineers and architects. Start understanding things like I said, the domain expertise of a lot of those guys is where their value is. And unfortunately, it's not always captured on the drawings. It's where you can capture it right now is in some of the apps that I'm seeing being built, whether that's around bridge design or water life cycle or, generative design, cool tools, or, and they're building their own component libraries actually in these practices so that they can start making recommendations to arrange, different data sources from different makers. I think they have to really think about that. I think my contractor friends, Ian and Mark, if you are not thinking about one day that you will become potentially either you're going to make stuff like my other contractors that now own factories. If you don't self-perform, a lot of my self-performing contractors are becoming manufacturer self-performance contractors. They're doing precast. They opened up, assembly location, like small assembly multi-trade locations. They're buying services contractors. If you're not going to make things, and even if you are, you better try to figure out what a systems integrator is at this point. Because like I have big general contractors around the world that are now getting bid documentation with manufacturing language around how they are going to be the systems integrator in situ and up front, like when they start. And this a true story just last week. Some of my biggest contractors said they read the first RFPs and they were like, we don't even know what these words mean. Like they had to Google them. They were like basic manufacturing terms around systems integrators. And they were around supply chain transparency, capabilities, and understanding the scheduling of things and technology. But if you don't know that, you got to start learning what a systems integrator actually is and what you can do to make things more transparent. Like I say all the time, Jane, I'm like, I always use the example of I could order a pizza with more technology on my iWatch, and you guys were still calling people to call people to see if my $300,000 generator is showing up on the job site today. We should stop that and really truly become technology integrators into our process and looking at things like, tracking issues and RFIs through things that actually connect to the design software so that we understand what I always say. I'm going to look at Ian and Mark because I can only see their faces. No more dead cats over the fence, right? I don't want to get someone's drawings and all of a sudden be like, what is this thing? Right. So we've got to really take a stance in the contractor side and the general side.
So there's a question around the difference between horizontal and vertical. So are the principles of what we're talking about here applicable to both infrastructure, horizontal and vertical construction, or are we just speaking to buildings?
No, I think we're talking, listen, we also own Civil 3D for those of you who don't know, some of our product lines and things like that. We're looking at lots of solutions across both vertical and horizontal builds when we're trying to understand, look, all the underground assemblies, all the, the bridge design that's happening out in infrastructure, all the roads, you still need to understand we have products that are amazing, like InfraWorks, that are already doing that now, that take things like inventor models and actually take the geography data from Esri, and you can literally cut and paste bridges that Revit can consume from InfraWorks data. And that exists today. Like you can't mess that up, because as an architect, I say, or as an engineer, because it doesn't allow you to make that bridge unmakeable because of the way in which the inventor data is consumed by Revit. We need the same things all across, whether you're building roads or bridges or hospitals or houses. I think, the data story and sharing of real data in real time, and making sure it stays intact for whatever that is that you're designing. And that you can still, again, use things like test fits and understand how things like SpaceMaker works, and how, Forma is going to affect you in the future state, where you can connect this data downstream, is really important, right? And by the way, that's not stuff that's 5 years away or 2 years away. That's like right now. We've had InfraWorks for so many years and things like that. So I think a lot of people sometimes hear me talk and think I'm talking about things that could be, but I'm mostly talking about things that are, if you just string them together slightly, if you rearrange your own chess pieces. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, thanks for that. I guess it might not be for you, but how are international product specs obtained and integrated into New Zealand projects, including warranties? I mean, do you work practically on the? I mean, I could answer it, but I know I could throw it out to a few people.
Yeah, we could throw it out there.
Could answer it.
I'd love to hear, because I'll just give you my general terms here right now. Like, I could find a million reasons why things won't work, but if you just sit down with the risk managers and the lawyers in a room and you go, hey, we're trying to buy this thing from this place, and they go, here's what you need to have to do, and it gets done. Like, it may be for mostly the bigger companies and consortiums that are out there, but like any one of these things, it's not hard to prefabricate or productize or buy manufactured goods. Usually it's the the legal things and the insurance guys, and by the way, not even them. If you go directly to them, they solve. It's the sort of like institutional thought knowledge. We think you can't do things, or we've heard you can't do that, or we know. It's like all those things, if you sit down with the direct people, all get solved. That's my opinion. But we have had to change some things around banking, in the past for things like stored materials, but it gets solved. You know what I mean? You can solve those things if somebody like reasonable sits and explains it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, cool. I mean, my understanding is, there's a reasonable amount of this happening. It's all about just having the right documentations according to code, like any other project.
Yeah.
That's, if anyone else wants to put their hand up and answer this in more detail, feel free. You can unmute yourself. Otherwise, I'm going to go to the next one. 4D, not seeing any hands. Jen, you can always just unmute someone. 4D in New Zealand for small to medium-sized projects. Are we seeing it? Is there a threshold of size for digitization? I mean, we saw some pretty small companies yesterday using some pretty cool models.
Yeah.
Like, is there an issue around people paying for this and not thinking that a digital model or 4D has value, or like, what are you seeing here?
I guess, like, listen, I never used to like the phrase, like, who's going to pay for the BIM model? And now I hear that same kind of idiotic, no offense to anyone, phrase, like, who's going to pay for the digital twin information? It's like, wait a minute, we've already went through this once before. Like, we already know that you're not now going to get the information once you start saying that till way too late in the game. I think we have to start thinking about, like, listen, in 2006, I owned a steel and concrete modular manufacturing company that did 4D scheduling, to understand the crane picks with, 5 different buildings we were doing in 2006 using Revit and CATIA at the time, and Navisworks, by the way. So I will tell you, like, and I wasn't very big back then. So like using 4D is very inexpensive these days, whether or not how you want to use it and for what big of a project, and like who's going to, it's like saying, like, what, when back in the day, because I'm old, you just can't tell, Ian and Mark, I just can cover it a little easier with the blonde. Like I used to say, my dad or my back in the day would be like, who's going to pay for project management software? Or if not, we're not using it. And I was like, it is better when we use it for ourselves, though. You realize, like, it's not, instead of me going sheet by sheet by sheet by sheet, I could just like use the software, and it's like in 5 minutes it was done. And yet we're sitting here going, like, who's going to pay for that? And I was like, we should pay for that. It's my time. It's better for me not to have to go sheet by sheet by sheet. The second you realize that you're doing this for yourself, and for your own productivity and for your own future state of what you want, the better off we are. Stop waiting for somebody to pay for something that you should be integrating that could be very inexpensive, that makes your people more productive than anybody else's, so you can do more work and win more work. I feel like that's just the biggest excuse I hear. It's sort of like victim mentality. I don't like victim mentality. It's like, you got to start thriving. We're not in the survival game anymore. Like if you're in the survival game, you won't be here anymore. You have to start thinking like, what is going to put you ahead? If little guys can do it, nothing stops you. I think that's why conferences are great. You look at these guys and you go, you just need, by the way, I think we just need reverse mentors that are under 30 for us, that tell us what their expected experience is in life, right? That they go, if I was doing this any other way, I would just do this. Half the stuff is free. And the other half is not very expensive, because kids figure out how to do it all day long, and they don't have as big a budgets as we do in our companies. So get a reverse mentor, get 5, start investing in some kids to start talking to, sponsor a women's rugby club in high school. There, some of those girls, I have 4 welders on my daughter's team. They know more about welding and new tech in welding than anybody I know in welding going out right now. So get some young people that actually want to integrate technology into their daily lives.
Awesome. I can see your office, Emma, some young people there. I know this is being broadcast at Piritahi through the office. So shout out to the young people. Come and get involved. Okay, so we're getting slightly through the time. Okay, quick question coming through. How quickly will AI disrupt and integrate the building space? And then I'm going to go on to tangible actions, what we're going to do.
I mean, I think the word disrupt is such a strange word. I don't know if anything is just going to be all of a sudden flip stuff on its head, in a day. The only thing that flipped stuff on its head in a day was COVID, as an example, or some force majeure like that. My friends that own big companies were for 3 years, we were trying to go paperless signatures. And they were they had task force around it and stuff. 3 days after COVID, they all have, paperless signatures. And they're that's not a technology change. That was the way in which we behave with technology that made the change. Nothing got invented in 3 days, in tech. So that word disrupt, you have to be a little cautious about. I don't think there's one ring to rule them all. I don't think there's and I always say that outside of New Zealand. I don't think that there is one magic bullet of one product. If it was, you would have bought it already. I think AI is happening already in so many products and machine learning. I mean, look at stuff like Pipe that we own that looks through specifications and does all the submittals and things like that. It's everywhere already. I think to what degree it's impacting these products you're using, you just have to understand the different types of machine learning and AI. But listen, I want AI and machine learning to come in a big way, because what did we learn yesterday? I want robots to do the robot work, and I want to do the really cool human work that I don't have to worry about the robot work anymore. I always say it to my architects, stop drawing fire stairs. Doors and hardware are the worst thing ever to coordinate. I'm sure there's AI out there. Somebody build me an app, or there must already be one. Look at Dormakaba in Germany. I don't have to do doors and hardware like I used to anymore. Let's let robots and AI and machine learning do the work that we don't want to do anymore. And I think that's where most technology companies get it wrong. They want to put AI and machine learning to the coolest, sexiest thing that we want to do as humans. And they forget, just give me the stuff that I never want to do again. And then I will buy that software tomorrow, right? Everybody buys the thing that makes their life easier. So never think about cheaper, or just think easy. Whatever makes my life easier, everybody wants to do instantaneously, right?
Yeah, awesome. I'm going to hopefully segue us into practical next steps. Part of your equation at the start was, this is not going so well. My computer is not liking my screen. Okay, there we go. I'm going to have to scroll through them.
No worries.
Zoom wants to quit. Right. Practical next steps is part of the change process. This is the work streams out of the Accord on innovation, one on digitization, which is being we're partnering with NZIOB, and that was kind of my involvement yesterday in the conference. So we're going to be doing a digital roadmap. We're going to map out the why, which is a lot of what we're speaking about today. Where are we going? When? How are we going to get there? Both vertical and horizontal. So we need to make the case, and we need to have a solid communication platform. So We're going to do more of things like this, but we're also going to have video and write it down so that you can use the why, the where, the when, the how, the what in your businesses to make the case. We're going to have a BIM project updating the handbook that's been done by a volunteer group a few years ago. So we're updating it, aligning it with ISO standards, CIC guidelines, and making sure that that information gets connected back to procurement. As part of that, I think the conversation's going to unfold. As you can see today, it's not just about BIM. It's about interoperability in general. It's about data sharing standards and where data sits and what are the issues around sharing data. What are the liability issues around sharing BIM models and data? Where does it get housed? How does it get passed on to the asset? So lots of things in there to discuss. And of course, a lot of capability building. People need to know what this all means. The other piece of work that completely crosses over and kind of is in the same area of innovation is this modern methods of construction work stream. So we'll be partnering with XSite New Zealand. We've got 2 working groups set up at the moment. We have a government working group. There was a question that came through the chat around, there's a lot of small companies and it's high risk, and we've had a few companies go under in New Zealand. What we've learned from looking overseas and how the market, how we can play a role in actually creating a bigger slice of the pie and creating a market is to make sure that there's some more demand coming into the industry. So we're working with the government portfolios that have purchasing power and that buy from the market and seeing what they can switch. So part of that needs to be, well, what is OSM? What are you buying? How do you talk about it? How do you put it in your contracts? How do you procure it? What other skills are needed to actually deliver it? So I know KO have learned a lot. Ministry of Education have been doing a lot, and Te Whatu Ora and Defence are really stepping into this space at the moment. So working with those guys and a lot of the other enabling government departments. The industry group will be working on this interoperability piece, definitions, supply chain, platforms, data sharing, and then all of that will feed back up into procurement. If it's not in the documents, in the right way, in the 3910, in the special conditions, it won't happen. We all know that when it's coming from government. So that's the kind of government demand. And then on the other side, we see that there's a big role for community housing providers and retirement villages who are much more market driven who have orders that are over 10, 20 units at a time. So what we can do to help them understand the opportunity in this space as well. So that's how we're doing on time. Okay, we've still got a few more minutes. I'm going to stop sharing. We would love to have you involved. The Accord is a collaborative partnership between industry and government. We only do what is most important and most relevant and what you need done, and we do that together. So please email me. I'd like to start having more innovation focused talks like this and gatherings, and really getting a handle on how we drive this forward. Speaking to Amy's equation at the start, overcoming the resistance.
Hey, Jane, I have a question for the audience.
Yeah.
Actually. How many of your services subbies out there? Any services subbies out there? Not one. Not one in the room actually the other day as well. And I think I want to challenge you all to know that the way I have found that most of this has been transpiring is that the things that are most expensive in these buildings are the structure and the services, right? That's where the more complicated bits are that, quite frankly, should be the first places you're looking to productize some of these things, where the money is. And you always go for the money, right? And unfortunately, most countries go to the thing that they think looks like it should be the first thing you prefabricate, which are these empty boxes of housing in places where there are heads in beds. That I caution you that you will learn more from bringing in your services subbies that actually have fab shops now that have been already fabricating some of these assemblies for many, many years, even here in this space, that you've got to somehow bring them into this conversation, because that is where the true makers are sitting right now, in the most expensive parts of the digital infrastructure buildings, the hospital buildings, the manufacturing buildings, even in the housing stuff. Again, shipping very expensive air doesn't make things very efficient. So I can tell you that we have got to figure out. It's not a modular or non-modular conversation. You got to really, I am seeing, like I've over the last few days, I'm like, where are my people at? Where am I mechanical, plumbing, electrical? Like, where are these guys and gals? Because these are the people you need to bring to the front of this process. They're going to help you create, you know, some change here quickly. I don't know if you guys, I would like, give me like a celebration thing if you agree with that or not. But I'm like, I don't know where they are in the room. Like Ian, like I'm glad. I like Ian and Mark yeah. All right, Jane Tyson, I like it. Like, where are they, Jane? These are the people that actually make the most complicated bits of every building I'm looking out of my window right now, and they're not represented in some of these conversations, right?
Okay, that can be my mission, to find one and bring them to the table. Okay, I'll report back. That's my KPI.
Thanks, Judy Zhang. That was your homework, Jane.
Okay, Judy will keep me accountable. Okay, there's one. Oh, actually, some of the amazing people on the chat are answering the questions for us, so I'm not going to go there with them. You'll also see my LinkedIn profile in the chat. What else? Just checking that I haven't missed anything. That's cool. I think we're going to wrap up there. Thank you so much, Amy. I hope you have a great weekend here in New Zealand, and really awesome to meet you. And thank you for your time and really helping us understand this space, playing a bit of chess with us, unpacking the kind of complexity. You make it sound simple, and we really look forward to staying in touch as we really embark on the practical steps of the equation over the next couple of years with all of these people.
Go Black Ferns, right? Like, we're going to end, I'm hopefully going to see some Black Ferns, and I'm going to see some rugby on Sunday. So like, go Black Ferns. I'm all in for New Zealand. So
awesome. Okay. Thanks everyone for your time. Have a good Friday. Have a good weekend, and make sure you connect back in with me. Cheers. Thanks team who helped run this. Cheers.